Okay, let's look at a comparison essay prompt about the nature of socialism in China and the Soviet Union. And again, this is asking for both similarities and differences, so I should have one of both. Those would be my two body paragraphs. And let's take a look at my brainstorm and see how I approach this. All right, so I have my brainstorm organized into two sections for the China and the Soviet Union. But remember, what I need to end up with is a similarity and a difference. And that those will be my two body paragraphs. So starting with my similarity, I am looking at some things that are in common kind of in both places. So if you look here in China, I've got rule by one communist party, and that's also true in the Soviet Union. You know, I've got Stalin here, and then I've got Mao here, okay? So that looks like a similarity. I've got this idea of a state-directed economy right here, and also in the Soviet Union. So back for China, the evidence of that, that's called the Great Leap Forward. That was China's effort to industrialize their economy. And the good evidence for the Soviet Union would be the 5-year plans telling factories and farms how much to produce. And I've got a couple of ideas. I know that in China, the government redistributed land to the peasants, which I think is kind of example of, government control. And I also know that government in Stalin's control, and they also know that Stalin's government eliminated their enemies with the Great Purges. So when I look at both sides and what I've got in green here, I think I can sum this up with a kind of a totalitarian government. With a totalitarian government and state control. And that'll work for a similarity. Now let's keep with the same brainstorm and look at the difference. All right, so what I'm looking for differences, I have down here, I marked that Stalin eliminated his enemies, but one thing that's different in China is the Cultural Revolution, which is somewhat like the Great Purges in that enemies of the state are being eliminated or sent off to prison camps. In China, this is carried out by private citizens. And what happened is Mao sort of announced that we needed to cleanse society of people who were holding on to capitalist values. And citizens, many of them students, took that into their own control. So I think that might be a difference. So the parallel for the Soviet Union, what I want to do is I'm looking at this. I'm just going to kind of model this for you. I'm looking at this and I'm realizing that the Great Purges are really a better parallel to this, that this is really the same idea, and that instead of it being carried out by private citizens, it's carried out by under Stalin's control directly. And that I think that's a good kind of parallel. So let me change that. So what I want to do is make this blue and make the Great Purges be the opposite of the Cultural Revolution. But I think this is probably where I'm going to focus. So I'm going to say in China, citizen enforcement, and in the Soviet Union, government enforce. So let's go to the next slide and see what that looks like as far as analysis goes. So for my similarity, remember I have them both identified as totalitarian governments, and I had the Great Leap Forward and the 5-year plans as proof of the government managing everything very carefully. So my small y is just why did China start the Great Leap Forward? And I can talk about economic competition, I can talk about the lack of industrialization. And same thing for Stalin, why did he start the 5-year plan? And I can focus on the plan specifically. They needed to boost their agricultural production, they needed to boost their industrial production. And then big picture, I'm looking at why did socialism lead to totalitarian governments in both places? Why does the government need so much control in this type of system? And hopefully that's going to be a big picture idea in which in both places I will be talking about China and the Soviet Union. When you're doing a comparison, big Y, you need to make sure at the end of the paragraph you're talking about both of them. Now let's look at the difference. So for my difference, remember I had in China, communism was enforced by citizens, and the Soviet Union was enforced only by the government. And I had the Cultural Revolution. Remember the speak bitterness meetings where people were encouraged to criticize authority figures like landlords and landowners? So why did the Cultural Revolution happen? What's Mao's perspective? Why do they need to refocus people's attitudes. Maybe I can talk about capitalism starting to creep into the economy. For the Soviet Union, I had the Great Purges. Why did the government use the Great Purges? Same kind of thing. Maybe Stalin is paranoid of his enemies or something like that. And for the big why, I want to focus on this difference on citizens versus only the government. And one thing to think about for China is Confucianism. Maybe there's a cultural attitude that's different in these two places that goes way back, that's a hint, that can help us explain why people would get involved in creating a country where everyone behaves the same and enforcing the kind of rule, whereas in the Soviet Union, which is more Western, it's more individualistic and directed by the government. So the last slide here is an outline that is just kind of an overview of what we've talked about. So here's what that would look like. Here's my similarity, totalitarian governments, and my difference, socialism enforced by citizens in China and by the government of the Soviet Union. I hope this helps your preparation of this essay and your studying for the chapter.